Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, David and Jason, for staying on time. We all, at least Jason and I, worked hard to pare down our slides, and we'll see if we can wrap up at the end of the hour here. So, yes, I'm going to talk about soil carbon and soil health in pasture systems this afternoon. Um, we use managed grazing, and farmers choose managed grazing for a whole lot of different reasons, but some of them may be profitability, as Jason and David talked about. But managed grazing can help meet a lot of other goals, and one of the goals that has been in the news a lot in agriculture circles, of course, is improving soil health, and then also soil carbon. And I put this terminology on here because it does seem like kind of a gold rush. Having been in agriculture and in this field for over 30 years now, we see uh, fads come and go over the years. And right now, there's a huge amount of interest in soil health across the spectrum in agriculture, which is great, and in soil carbon storage. So what I want to talk about here and kind of frame out some questions is if soil carbon is our goal, what are the outcomes are we seeking? Going back to those goals on the previous slide, is it profitability? Is it pasture resilience? What are those goals? And then how will we know when we're achieved them? And what are some of the trade-offs that we're having to weigh before we make any changes? Okay, so we know very clearly, it's well substantiated that following the soil health principles can promote soil carbon storage. How much soil carbon storage is another question. But when we have livestock in our system, we can actually meet all five of those soil health principles. Um, so just doing that is a good start, but then we can think about things like increasing plant diversity. I'll show you some data that shows that that is a great benefit in soil carbon, maintaining adequate residual in our grazing systems. If we have annual crop ground, consider incorporating cover crops and grazing those. And then if we really want to take it to the next level, native warm seasons are the kings of storing soil carbon. This is a publication that I put together a few years ago with Dr. Randy Jackson at UW-Madison, and the link is here in the QR code. And this kind of goes through the spectrum of what we know about soil carbon and pasture systems and what we feel that we can and can't do. Some of the factors that influence soil carbon in pastures, as you can see here, are things that are outside of our management practices. In fact, the one thing that has the greatest influence on carbon storage is our soil texture, which just as it influences what we can plant in the pastures and what performs well, it also influences greatly how much carbon we can store. So we have our sandy soils, which have too much oxygen and not enough water for those, both for our plants to create residual plant material and for the microbiology to function very well. So those are going to have the lowest potential for soil carbon. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have clays and grading into poorly drained soils that have too much water, not enough oxygen. And so we get, especially in wet soils, accumulation of undegraded plant materials, very high soil organic matter potential. And then we have our Goldilocks situation right in the middle. We have a good balance of oxygen and water, and moderate soil organic matter potential. Not much we can do about that. Also just want to review our soil organic carbon pools. So this top one, the free particulate organic matter, that would be plant residues, fairly fresh organic matter that's being input and it turns over rapidly in the system. The middle one here is called particulate organic matter, or POM. And this is matter that's been processed somewhat by the microbiology, and it's a little bit more stable. Um, that cycles every few years up to decades. And then kind of the gold standard, what everyone is seeking, is this last one, the mineral associated organic matter, which is extremely stable in the soil. And this is what we used to call humus. It's there indefinitely. As you can see in this graphic, um, all of the organic matter levels increase and then kind of level off. It seems like the soil has a kind of a equilibrium point that it'll get to. The smallest level is the mineral associated, and the other two can actually increase a little bit more. Okay, so if we're thinking about pasture systems and soil organic carbon, the point at which we're going to make the biggest difference is when we convert annual cropland to perennial pasture. And this meta-analysis from 2016, 42 studies showed an average of about almost 40% increase in soil organic carbon when land was transitioned from annual production to perennial. And that's just that an annual system has too much disturbance and not enough consistency for those microbes to develop the soil organic matter. So what we see is that we have a lag phase in the first couple of years where this microbiology readjusts itself and gets going after seeding down a perennial pasture. Then you have a fairly rapid accumulation. And again, people are seeing this apparent plateau where we really can't go any higher than a certain level, depending on the soil type. This is another study. This was in Michigan, 2018, where they, again, in the year one, they started by seeding down a perennial pasture in a number of different soil types. And as you can see, there's a steady increase across the 4 years of the study. And our clay loam, the blue line, was the highest in terms of accumulation of organic matter, as we would expect. The sandy loam was in the middle, and our sand was the lowest. And overall, these are the increases in soil organic matter percent. So that would be what was given to you in a soil test, what you see in there. And on average, from converting an annual field to a perennial pasture, we can see about a 1.5% increase in soil organic matter. So now, once we have an established pasture, what are our options? What's our opportunity for further increasing soil organic matter? And this is where we're seeing a lot of folks out in social media talking about all kinds of practices that that are claimed to help increase soil carbon once we have an established pasture. And across several of these, I just pulled out 3 things that I keep seeing over and over again: increasing species diversity, overgrazing, followed by long rest periods. That's what we used to call mob grazing. The theory behind a lot of these arguments seems to be that we can somehow manipulate those plants to produce root exudates or compounds that they exude into the soil that can help the soil microbes sequester more carbon. And I'm just not seeing enough evidence out there to really get behind that idea. But we'll go through these 3 management tools and see what the outcomes might be based on the research that I've seen. So there are several studies that were done by the Pasture lab that's run by ARS in Pennsylvania that I'm going to be reviewing here. And they all looked at diverse species mixes of, several different grasses and legumes and forbs compared to a two species mix. So this one was 11 species versus two species. What they did in this study is they looked at several parameters of pasture growth and performance. What they found was in each of the cases, we've got the light blue, the two species mix in light blue and the 11 species mix in dark blue. They measured photosynthesis. It was greater in this diverse mix. There was more carbon capture going on. And that resulted in a greater root mass in those plants. They measured how much rooting mass and depth they had, and there was a gain in root mass, as well as a gain of about 25 to 30% in forage yield overall. So this demonstrates clearly that species diversity can improve a lot of measurable changes in our pasture system. So that's a good thing. Another study that they did, the same lab did, looking at actual increases in soil organic carbon or changes in soil organic carbon. And this one was a study that had 5 species compared to a 2 species mix, and they looked at it over 9 years. And the way to read these graphs, this top light green bar is the total soil profile. So they measured soil organic matter down to about 100 centimeters or about 3 feet or so. And you can see compared to the 2 species mix, the 5 species mix had more than twice as much soil organic carbon in the whole soil profile. There was actually a little bit less in the top couple of inches. But if you look down at the lower levels in the soil profile, this is where this 5 species mix was gaining organic carbon, which is a good thing. So we can say that species diversity both increases some measurable production values that we have and can also increase soil organic carbon. So how about those other two factors? Jason and I and a lot of us who teach about managed grazing talk about the 3 R's. So can we manipulate our rotation, our residual, and our rest to increase soil organic carbon? When we do this management, rotation, residual, and rest, we're going to maximize our productivity and quality and increase intake. Those are all good things. We find that this is really the best strategy for overall full season pasture performance. But again, what we're seeing is recommendations to modify our management of residual and rest in order to increase soil carbon. And that's what I want to spend a little bit more time talking about for the rest of my time here. So first of all, I haven't seen a lot of data that suggests that manipulating residual or rest does have an impact on soil carbon. In fact, this is one study that I'm aware of that was conducted here in Wisconsin a couple of years ago, and it kind of shows the opposite or gives us some big question marks. Each of these dots in these 3 graphs are individual existing pasture sites in Wisconsin where they measured soil organic carbon. They looked at those, they collected a lot of other data about how the pastures are management. So on our y-axis here is soil organic carbon levels. And then in our first box on the left here is residual height. So they asked all the farmers what residual height they left. And as you can see, from 5 centimeters up to 20 centimeters, there's no pattern there. We're not seeing any difference or any influence of residual height on soil organic carbon. For the middle one here is the rest period. The soil carbon folks are saying a longer rest period will help increase soil organic carbon. We're not seeing that with this data. In fact, when they go from 10 to 50 days of rest, we're actually seeing a somewhat negative relationship in soil organic carbon storage. We're not sure why that is, but as you can see, there's a lot of noise in here. There's a lot of differences, but the general trend was negative. The one thing that there was a positive trend was pasture age. So this goes back to what I was saying before. The increase in soil organic matter after a pasture is established does slow, but there's evidence here that it does continue to increase over time, given enough time, given enough patience. So we're not seeing a lot of influence of residual or rest period on soil organic carbon, but there are some trade-offs that we need to talk about, especially on the side of residual. That's what Jason and I are most concerned about here is there are so many positives to leaving adequate residual that we wouldn't recommend grazing to the ground or grazing very low except under certain circumstances. And the positives are not only we're going to get faster regrowth, but we're going to improve the conditions that lead to greater residue inputs, microbial activity. We're going to stabilize soil temperatures. We're going to stabilize soil moisture. We're going to create a better environment for those microbes to do their work. Keeping in mind too that the leaves, when we graze down to the ground, the leaves are our solar panels. So what we're going to end up doing is lengthening our rest period and having to give those plants longer to regrow. So these two graphs are just diagrams of rotations, typical of in Wisconsin. When we leave about 4 inches of residual, photosynthesis is going to fuel regrowth. So we're not going to have a stop of growth while the plant regrows some leaves. If we leave no residual, the plant is going to use energy reserves to first grow some leaves and then start the photosynthesis process. So what we usually see is we've had to add at least a couple of weeks of rest in order to, when we graze down so low. I'm going to be showing you some data from Jeff Brink at the Dairy Forage Research Center. He actually looked at some of these parameters and gathered some data, some yield and quality data from doing some of these practices. So this was a study on residual height. So as you can see, we've got 6 inches down to 1.5 inches residual height. And the level that we're recommending, the 3 to 4 inches, you can see we've got our 6 cycles. When you get down to 1.5 inches, we've dropped down to 4 cycles here, longer rest period. We have more forage availability at each rotation when we do the lower residual height, but overall yield is lower when we graze down to the ground for the whole season. So this one is looking at longer and shorter rest periods. So letting the plant mature, which is another thing that's being recommended. And as you can see here too, our rest, sticking with that 30-day rest period, we've added almost another 1,000 pounds of yield and also increased the digestibility significantly. So that was a whirlwind of some data about soil health and soil carbon and pasture systems. I just want to end with saying following the soil health principles, species diversity is a great thing, and following the 3 R's, and then finally have patience. These things change over time. The longer we have our pasture in the ground, the better it'll become. With that, I'm done.